Hello, dear colleagues. So I am beginning. The title is, as already mentioned, Commemorative Practices and Memorial Sites, a case study of the Armenian Genocide Memorial. Each period brings about new layers of ethnic or national identity, reinterpretations of the past, and new perceptions of the present. This process was manifested in the 20th century as well. The Armenian people suffered great hardships over the last century. Approximately 2 million people fell victim to massacres 1894, 1896, and 1909, and genocide between 1915 to 1923. The larger part of Armenians' homeland was emptied of its native population, and the new state was established on but one-tenth of its historic territory. Armenians were scattered all over the world, and the tragedy they lived through had a major impact on their psychology, bringing about a new, powerful layer of collective and historical memory, unique in its deep sensitivity and endurance. Along with great economic and cultural achievements, Soviet rule 1920 to 1991 brought about substantial territorial Kars province, this is Kars province, Nagorno-Karabakh and Nakhichevan autonomous region, approximately the same amount of territory which now has the Republic Armenia, and human losses through the tyranny of Stalin and the Great Patriotic War. In 1964, 1965, on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the genocide, a decision was made to erect an obelisk dedicated to the victims of the Armenian genocide. This was done in the form of memorial complex, the official opening of which took place on 29th of November, the same day as the establishment of Soviet rule in the first Republic of Armenia, Eastern Armenia. Every year since 24 April 1968, the day of remembrance of the victims of the Armenian genocide. For 55 years and counting, hundreds of thousands of people have ascended to the memorial to pay their respects to the victims of the Armenian genocide. The presentation seeks to expand on what memorial practices the Armenian Genocide Memorial offers, what they rely on, and what symbolic mechanisms are at work at the memorial. So this is the March of People in 2018, April 24, and this is in 2017 maybe. The Armenian Genocide Memorial is a living and changing memorial complex. This is due to several factors, including the fact that over time several historical and political events related to Armenians were qualified as the continuation of genocide. In other words, the Armenian Genocide Memorial as a site, as well as the commemorative practices manifested there, have undergone certain changes conditioned by the events of the last 100 years. So the subtitle, The Armenian Genocide in the Context of the Past and the Present. At the time of its opening, the memorial dedicated to the victims of the Armenian Genocide comprised two parts. The crypt, uh, the crypt remembrance hall, and the obelisk of rebirth. Uh, the construction of the remembrance wall was completed a year later. The site remained in this form for 2 decades. After the massacres of Armenians in Sumgait, 3 Khachkars cross stones were erected between 1988 and 1992, side by side at the front of memorial. So today, more than 3 decades later, the first monuments that people come across when walking up the hill to the memorial are those 3 Khachkars, cross stones. Why and how did they get there? On February 20, 1988, the extraordinary session of the Regional Council of the People's Deputies of the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast region of the Azerbaijani SSR adopted a resolution, I am quoting, on mediation before the Supreme Councils of Azerbaijani SSR and Armenian SSR for the transfer of the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Region from Azerbaijani SSR to the Armenian SSR. From that day on, Yerevan Opera Square saw rallies with the participation of hundreds of thousands of people in support of the decision. In response to the in response to the continuous demonstrations, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the head of the USSR, addressed the working people of Armenia and Azerbaijan on 26th February. He called for calm and public order and asked people to return to their daily lives. The people of Yerevan responded to this call immediately. However, in Sumgait, a town in Azerbaijan approximately 25-30 kilometers from the capital, Baku, events unfolded rather differently. Beginning on 27th February and continuing for 3 days, in the presence of Soviet army units, mass public disorder occurred, during which, according to the official data, I am quoting, 26 citizens of Armenian origin were killed. End of quote. According to various unofficial sources, though, the number of Armenians murdered was about 50 or 115, and it was even estimated to be several hundred. In these massacres, Armenians were beaten, tortured, raped, and thrown out of windows, slain with metal rods and knives, chopped with axes, beheaded, and burnt in fires. This is important to note because these violent tactics are so closely akin to those during the genocide of Armenians at the beginning of the 20th century. Official news releases by Telegraph Agency of Soviet Union TASS referred to these atrocities as, I am quoting, disorders provoked by a group of hooligans where there have been incidents of insolence and violence, end of quote. The Procurator's Office of the USSR, too, qualified the massacres of Armenians in Sumgait as actions perpetrated by hooligans and killings driven by hooliganism. Yet, substantial evidence proves that these massacres were premeditated and carried out according to a concrete plan. Many believe that the massacres in Sumgait were the Azerbaijani government's response to the wish of people in the Armenian SSR and Nagorno-Karabakh for the reunion of Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia, which was demonstrated both peacefully and within their democratic right. The criminal actions against these demonstrations aimed to thwart any potential resolution to the issue, to terrorize the Armenians, and in particular, to force the Central Soviet authorities to forego the demand for a just solution to the Karabakh issue with the threat of further bloody actions. Significantly, the Armenian people perceived the Sumgait massacres as a continuation of the Armenian genocide, which immediately translated into diverse actions. On April 24, 1988, despite the official ban on demonstrations and rallies in Yerevan, one such significant action took place. It involved placing a Khachkar cross-stone memorializing the victims of Sumgait along the border of the Genocide Memorial during the traditional annual processions. The structural composition of this Khachkar is of interest too. The centerpiece is a large cross surrounded by 26 smaller crosses, which seem to symbolize the crosses laid or indeed not laid on the graves of the victims of the Sumgait massacres. The second of the Khachkars, now located on the edge of the Armenian Genocide Memorial, is dedicated to the memory of the victims of another series of massacres of Armenians between 13th to 19th January 1919 in Baku. In the 1980s, some 200,000 of around 1.7 million total inhabitants of the capital city of Azerbaijan were Armenian. These were the third set of massacres of Armenians in Baku over the 20th century, resulting in the total exodus of Armenians from the city. Soviet troops entered the town only when the existence of Soviet rule was threatened. According to unofficial data, the number of Armenians killed in Baku during the massacre reached upwards of 400. However, the issue was never investigated. Once again, killings qualified by the people as one more genocide were not officially condemned by the Soviet authorities. The third of Khachkars stands in memory of the victims of the November 1988 events in Kirovabad, Ganzak, in Armenian, presently Ganja. So this is how the Khachkar Square came into being. Every year, during the April March of Remembrance, countless flowers would be placed near the three Khachkars in memory of the innocent victims. Here, too, both commemorative and protest demonstrations would be organized every year between 13th to 20th January and 27th to 29th February to commemorate the victims of the massacres in Baku, Sumgait, and Kirovabad and voice the demands of the refugees and their descendants. These Khachkars evoke the nexus between times, conveying the message that the massacres of 1988-1990 are evidence that at the close of the 20th century, the leaders of Soviet Azerbaijan have continued in their way the early 20th century policy of extermination of the Armenians adopted by the leadership of Ottoman Turkey, the model for the latter's contemporary statehood. That is to say, genocide for Armenians is not merely an event of the distant past, but has been going on for several decades in various manifestations. Genocidal acts are still underway through ethnic cleansing and forced deportation of Armenians in Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh. The next subtitle is International Recognition of the Armenian Genocide and the Remembrance or Spruce Grove. Another symbolic manifestation of the continuation of the Armenian genocide is the Remembrance Spruce Grove, proof of the ongoing process of international, official, and unofficial recognition of the genocide. The grove was established 30 years after the opening of the memorial in 1997, 2 years after the foundation of the Museum Institute, on the western borderline of the area officially considered as the premises of the memorial complex. The first tree which you see in the picture, perhaps at first it was birch, replaced with silver spruce sometime later, was planted near the newly built museum on October 14, 1997, by the former U.S. Republican Senator Bob Dole. So this is another picture of a Remembrance Grove. The visits of state and official delegations and the ceremonial planting of trees are perhaps the best way of recording the fact that they do pay their respects. In addition to reminding those who visit the memorial for years to come, planting a tree is a symbolic gesture and remains a well-known, established, and thoughtful approach to conveying empathy, preserving the memory of someone or something, and ultimately reflecting the triumph of life. The kind of tree is significant. The evergreen spruce symbolizes that respect to and remembrance are eternal and timeless. Therefore, the launch of the Remembrance Grove has given a new value to the memorial dedicated to the victims of the Armenian genocide, gradually adding a global dimension. One could say that the presence of the world in the memorial The perspective that the Armenian genocide was indeed a global disaster and therefore should be remembered by the world is manifest through the cruces of the Remembrance Grove. We believe that Remembrance Grove has and continues to act as a powerful tool for situating the Armenian genocide in a global moral and political dimensions. So this is Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, uh, President Macron, Charles Michel. This is planted by um, Dutch Chancellor Angela Merkel. These are just signage. This is just a view. Mhm. The compositional centerpiece of the memorial built in 1965-1967 is the eternal flame burning in the middle of the Remembrance Hall. Leading to the center is a wide walkway, the directionality of which is accentuated by the Remembrance Wall stretching along the left edge of the road. So this is the memorial wall. A second life, a symbolic function, was added to the Remembrance Wall at some point between 1988 and 2002. Using donor funds, the management of the Museum Institute developed an initiative to engrave in Armenian on the front of the Remembrance Wall the names of some 52 cities and localities vastly populated with Armenians. Those names were selected from around 2,500 Armenian inhabited settlements of the Ottoman Empire, including historical Armenia and Cilicia, wherefrom the peaceful Armenian population was exiled, where there were massive massacres of the Armenians. The names of settlements engraved on the Remembrance Wall are the only inscriptions on the premises of the memorial pointing out specific toponyms related to the genocide. Therefore, it is completely natural that every year on April 24, the descendants of the former residents would put flowers under the engraved names of the settlements and take photographs against the background of those names, thus ritualizing a memorialization of their lost homeland, such as in these pictures. Therefore, it is completely natural that mhm, there is no monument relating to the Armenian genocide in the world that has the names of the victims engraved on it, with the exception perhaps of some personal khachkars. Therefore, the names of the victims' localities assume a much more generalized, transformed role. By reading them, people remember and commemorate their relatives and former inhabitants of those settlements. The Armenian genocide and manifestations of humanity. The world is full of humanists. At all times and everywhere, there would appear people who would offer a hand of compassion to those in danger. In the years preceding and following the Armenian genocide, this is true as well. The Armenian people are grateful to those persons, and to remember and honor them is another of the functions of the Armenian Genocide Memorial Complex. The Remembrance Wall thus enacts in name of its name in another way. Sometimes between 1996 and 2012, small urns of soil were deposited in special niches behind the wall, taken from the graves of foreign social and political figures, intellectuals, and missionaries who voiced their protest against the massacres and genocide of the Armenians perpetrated by the Turkish government in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These are the pictures of the remembrance wall from another side. The themes of the Armenian genocide: struggle and heroes, graves of freedom fighters. While behind the remembrance wall, symbolic funeral rites are evoked to establish a global presence, the site also includes actual graves. Between 1992, five freedom fighters were laid to rest in a small green plot in front of the easternmost end of the wall. These men who were killed in action are buried on the site of the genocide memorial for several reasons, including the perception of the memorial as a cemetery and a pilgrimage
Five
site.
minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Mhm. As a martyr's shrine. Noteworthy is that the tombs of these five fighters are among the most unique symbols of struggle and heroism of the memorial site. On the occasion of the April 24 marches, the graves of these fighters are covered with flowers, and typically incense is lit by families and friends of the martyrs, emanating rich aromatic smoke. From genocide to rebirth. Another constituent of the three-part memorial complex is the reviving Armenia obelisk, which symbolizes the rebirth of Armenia and her people after the genocide. The 40-meter high obelisk consists of two parts and, according to architect Sashur Kalashian, symbolizes, I'm quoting, sprout of life, end of quote, likened to sprouting plant breaking through the surface of the soil, fighting for survival. The constructed monument, symbolizing the revival of the Armenians and Armenia, faces what might be considered a natural monument, one of the most important symbols uh, 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 of all Armenians, the two peaks of Ararat. The incorporation of the mountains into this symbolic nexus also alludes to another historical event important to Armenian culture. According to the Old Testament, in Noah's time, a global catastrophe, the Great Flood, befell the world with the consequent salvation of mankind. Noah's Ark was grounded on Mount Ararat. Similarly, we may consider the Armenian genocide as a global catastrophe when an attempt was made to exterminate an entire nation that had been living in its homeland for centuries. The remnants of the Armenian nation have, however, spread throughout the world and, phoenix like, risen from the ashes anew. The proof of which is Armenia's capital, Yerevan, spread before the Mount Ararat, which is currently on the territory of Turkey, below the Armenian Genocide Memorial. Thus, even the location of the Armenian Genocide Memorial relates to several global events. In this way, the hill of Tsitsernakaberd brings together the two most significant Armenian symbols: the man made Armenian Genocide Memorial and the, at a visually accessible distance, the natural monuments of Greater and Lesser Ararat. The sacramental idea of these two monuments facing each other is deep and indicates the ability of human beings to recover from global and local disasters. So, and the last subtitle: Everlasting Memory of the Genocide and the Temple of Eternity.
You have
The
one
other
minute, so you
one
should
minute.
try to, yeah, you should try
Okay.
to conclude.
And let me just show the pictures. The the last point, the April 24 March of the memorial starts from its entrance. The road leading to the monument passes through the park of Tsitsernakaberd and is around 1 kilometer long. Contrary to public holidays, authorities would not and still do not participate in the organization of remembrance marches. With one exception, Yerevan municipality would provide free of charge buses to make it easy for the people visiting the memorial to return downtown, and several other districts from a square another kilometer or so down from the monument. In other words, unlike the state holidays of the Soviet period, an important feature of the annual 24 April marches, which have been going on for 55 years, is the self organization of the people. This is the indicator of the ideological load of Remembrance Day, the significance given thereto, its essence, spirit as a secular pilgrimage, and hence its role in the Armenian identity. Just the last pictures. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. So thank you very much for
So I had to change a bit the title of my presentation to correspond to actually I have written. I'm sorry. Here? Yes. Okay. So the name is More Participation, Less Opposition, the contestation of Portugal's first memorial to the victims of slavery as a case study. So today I actually will only present one case study that is part of my doctoral research, in which I study the role of citizen participation in resolving conflicts among diverse stakeholders that hold very different values. And in my general research, I have three case studies. The first one is the Dutch Holocaust Memorial of Names that was inaugurated in 2020 in Amsterdam. The second one is Britain's Holocaust Memorial and Learning Center in London that we actually don't know if it's going to be built or not. And the 31, that is the case study that I'm going to present today, is the Memorial to Enslaved People in Lisbon. And all these case studies, they were selected on the basis of the degree of participation that was allowed in the decision-making process. So during 1 year, I made a screening of recent memorial projects that are being developed now, and I've made a small evaluation, an initial evaluation of the participatory process. So, the Memorial to Enslaved People is a project that was initiated in 2017 in Lisbon by an anti-racist association called JAS. And they decided to advocate for this memorial because Portugal is a country who had a great role in the slave trade and the traffic of enslaved Africans. But in the cityscape, in the memorial landscape, it's a city that mostly has monuments that focus on the Portuguese colonial empire and what they call the age of discoveries. So in realizing that there was this gap, this association started to advocate for this project. And interestingly, why then I go back to this idea of comparing cases where the degree of participation is different. This was the first time that a memorial project has been financed through the city participatory budgeting. And I don't know if you are familiar with this, but the participatory budgeting is a mechanism from the government where they make available a portion of the budget of the municipality. And citizens, they decide how to spend this. So usually civil society organizations, they came up with a project. This project is presented to the whole public. Citizens are invited to vote, and the winning projects, they are implemented by the municipality. So this association proposed in 2017 to create a memorial to enslaved people in Lisbon, and they won. They received 1,176 votes. And what is also interesting in this case is that usually the responsibility of implementing the projects that win the participatory budgeting rests with the municipality, but in this case, the association really pushed to keeping involving citizens in this process. So they decided that they would hold a memorial competition, and that once again the citizens would be invited to participate in the selection of the design. And then in 2019, after 1 year, they were thinking through. And after 1 year, they finally organized this memorial competition. They invited 3 artists of Afro and African descent to present a proposal. And they organized 6 consultations in Lisbon and also in the metropolitan area. So here you have the 3 projects. The first one is called Plantation, Prosperity, and Nightmare. That was made by Kiluanji Kiarenda, who is an artist from Angola. The second one has no title, but it's a very abstract and conceptual project that was made by Jaime Laureano from Brazil. And the third project, The Boat, was proposed by Grada Quilomba, who is an artist from Portugal. So during these 6 sessions, everyone was invited to participate. And unfortunately, for reasons that one day you can discover in my research, not a lot of people participated in this process. So actually, a total of 132 people went to vote in these sessions, which, if we think in a city with 10 million inhabitants, it's not very significant. But this is also a problem that they have with the participatory budgeting in general. People just don't take the trouble to participate in the political life of their cities. But so in this case, the winning project is called Plantation, Prosperity, and Nightmare, which is the project that was made by Kiluanji Kiarenda. And this design represents a sugarcane plantation made of 400 black aluminum stakes, which are supposed to evoke 4 centuries of slavery. And the aluminum stakes, they are arranged in a triangular form, which is meant to evoke the triangular slave trade. And later on, also the artist told that he chose this color for the aluminum stakes to represent a mournful plantation. So shortly after this proposal won, it started to become contested within the Black community. But it's really very small. I think I was the only person interested in this opposition. Um, but let's say that there was a broad consensus that memorial to enslaved people was necessary because there's no memorial commemorating the enslaved in Portugal. But there was a huge disagreement about what form and what style this memorial should have. And in this case, the most vocal critics of the memorial were two Angolan activists who live in Lisbon. And they said that erecting a sugarcane plantation in the center of the city is not only insensitive, but also disrespectful to the African and Afro-Portuguese community. And this because they pointed that sugarcane plantations were sites of immense suffering, where enslaved Africans, they endured both physical and psychological trauma. So why are we reproducing a plantation in the city? And in addition, this very small group of opponents, they also raised concerns about the process of selection of this design, because they said that they were not bound to accept a decision taken by 100 people. And they were very vocal on social media about this, but their criticisms were completely ignored, except by me. And in 2021, they tried to force this issue by petitioning. So they launched online a petition asking for the city council to stop the process. And even if it's, of course, this is an online petition, but the petition has more signatures than the number of votes that selected the project. So it's very tricky. And when I started to think about this opposition, I realized that the main points of contention in this urban conflict, let's say, they are related to, okay, the first one, there's this concern about the number of people that were consulted, that actually this is very much related to the quality of a decision-making process. And the second concern is related to the suitability of the design that was selected, which refers to the results of the decision-making process. And actually, both of these aspects of the contestation, they are very much related to a very important concept in democratic theory, that is democratic legitimacy. And there are many definitions of democratic legitimacy, but at least in my research, I thought it would be useful to use this twofold definition of democratic legitimacy, where we have the inputs and outputs of political decisions. So to try to put it simply, the input legitimacy refers to the degree of inclusiveness and influence. Sorry. Inclusiveness and influence of citizens in decision-making process. And the output legitimacy relates to the acceptance of the results of the decision making. So when I was thinking about this case study, I was analyzing this, the input and output legitimacy. And to analyze the output, the input legitimacy, I use a model. I won't explain this in depth because I don't have time. But this model was something that sort of guided my interviews, the questions I should ask. I should ask questions about architecture means the design of the process, how the participatory process was designed. It was focusing, it was targeting what kind of groups, what kind of decisions they could really have an influence on, etc. The actions makes reference to what happened in the consultation itself, and the results relates to how what was decided during the consultation really became a policy, something that should be implemented. And usually is the first stage, the architecture stage, that really sets the foundation of the rest of the process. And when I was doing my analysis, this is the summary of the analysis. What I realized, what I discovered is that the most problematic phase was the beginning, was the architecture phase, because in this stage, the association, they set up an advisory committee, and they have many meetings to decide how the competition would take place. And it was at this stage also that they formulated the design brief. And this design brief asked for an abstract memorial without human figuration. And later on, this also became a topic in the contestation. As I need to run, okay, I will go to the output legitimacy. Something I forgot to say is that the activists that were contesting the results of the decision making, they did not participate in the consultation. And they will argue that they did not participate because none of the designs were attractive, were suitable. But there was one occasion where the opponents of the memorial met the proponents of the memorial, and this was in an online debate. And this online debate escalated really, really fast. Here I have just some examples of phrases that they would say. So the proponents of the memorial, they would defend the project, saying that it was participatory and people voted. This was the project that received the most number of votes. And this is an argument that relates to what I call the civic register of values. This is a civic argument related to a democratic decision. And then we'll say the opponents will say that they cannot accept a sugarcane plantation, that they get sick just of imagine that they will pass by a sugarcane plantation, and that no one can ever convince them that this is a suitable symbol for the memorial to enslaved people. And this kind of arguments, they related to ethical values. So here we have two sides of the discussion talking about the same topic, but using completely different value registers. Okay, and this, I was not the person that invented the term value registers. During the research, I actually, analyzing the interviews, I could find many other registers, but this was proposed by Natalie Enig, who is a sociologist that studies values. And okay, trying to conclude, Yes, unfortunately, I don't have suggestions for how to make processes more agonistic, because this was a project where in the beginning I thought would be the best case study. It would be an example for other cities that would like to build memorials. But in this case, this process also became somehow antagonic. There was somehow a dispute with antagonistic underpinnings, let's say, and this because of this clash between the ethical and the civic register of values. But also, there's another value that is very important that we call the domestic value, that actually relates to everything that is related to ancestry and origins. So this is because the opponents of the memorial, they would also say that this memorial is the meaning to them, to their ancestors, and they don't want the Black community in Portugal to be known as the people who allowed a plantation to be erected in the center of the city. So even if I don't have, unfortunately now, suggestions for agonism, at least I think it helps us to understand which are the values that are the locus of antagonism. And perhaps this is already a step forward in our discussion. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Alana. I think we are getting closer to understanding a bit what hinders agonism in the practice. And so we are reaching our third presentation in this panel, which is the work of two academics, but only one is here in person. So the work is by Sabina Tanovic, who is not here, and who is an architect and independent researcher interested in the role of design in processes of commemoration and memorialization. And she is also the author of a book with Cambridge University Press about designing memory, the architecture of commemorative commemoration in Europe from 1914 till the present. And our author or speaker, presenter, who is actually here with us, is Selma Hughes, who grew up in Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and her ongoing research about memory began as a subconscious form of therapy, creating a collection of individual and collective voices. Selma teaches design foundation at the American University of Sharjah College of Architecture, Art and Design in the United Arab Emirates. And today she's going to talk about liminal spaces of memory and remembrance, realignment of agonistic interpretations at sites of complex histories.
Okay, so I'll try to stick with the timeline. The presentation is quite packed with slides, so hopefully that will be useful. So today I will present actually two case studies and trying to bridge the kind of idea of liminal spaces of remembrance and potential for agonistic pathways. In 2001, the Oscar-winning film No Man's Land came out, and it was sort of a descriptive of what had just happened a few years before that in the war in Bosnia, and it shows this fictional stories about two soldiers, one Bosnian, one Serb, who were stuck in the trenches. And the situation wouldn't be, it might be kind of awkward, but just not tragic yet, if that was all. But in the movie, the third soldier is discovered, another Bosnian who was lying presumed dead, but then as he's coming back to conscious, they discover that he's lying on a landmine, and so then the whole kind of drama evolves around that. But during this development of the film, there's sort of hints that there might be like an agonistic forum between the two soldiers of how they can negotiate with the UN in getting everybody out there. Similarly, the reflection in a graphic novel by Joe Sacco, The Fixer, also talks about, in a greater details, kind of reveals the layers of the siege of Sarajevo and the war within the war, and the local criminals profiting during the war. So 3 decades since the Dayton Peace Agreement, we have Bosnia and Herzegovina divided into 2 entities, the Federation of Bosnia consisting of Bosniaks and Croat population, and Republika Srpska with Serb population. Today, present-day Sarajevo is sort of dotted with numerous memorials and sort of celebrating or memorializing different battles, individuals, both soldiers and civilians, some private memorials. But as you can see in this image, there's nothing uniform about it. On the other hand, we have some very important sites in the city that were crucial for the defense of the siege that are left out of this memorialization. And so when we look at the site of Sarajevo, we are putting on the map our 2 case study. One, which is on the right, is Vraca Memorial Park, which was built after the World War II. And then the site on the left is on the western edge of the boundary of the siege of Sarajevo during 1992-96 war that now kind of lays forgotten. So in terms of the first case study, Vraca Memorial Site has quite long history, and I'll quickly go through it because it's familiar, I'm sure, to everybody in the room. It was built as a fortress during the Austro-Hungarian period. So it kind of, the site itself goes through these 5 different periods. First one being Austro-Hungarian. Obviously, with the assassination, we roll into the World War I, and then the next phase, World War II, Germany occupies the city, and at the time, Sarajevo was actually part of the independent country of Croatia and allied to the fascists. So they used the site, memorial site, which didn't exist there, but near the fortress, as execution site, actually. And so the third phase is Yugoslav era. We have throughout Yugoslavia, we have sort of building the symbol of resistance, civilian resistance to fascism in a way of spomeniks, and they're quite famous throughout. The case study that we are talking about, Vraca, was conceived in 1960s, but it really didn't get built till like 1980s. But you can kind of see in many of these spomeniks that they really blur the line between the sculpture, landscape architecture, and become quite more embedded as sites in manifestation of what they're memorializing. After the inauguration of the site, it became quite popular for school visits, kind of as an educational site, essentially, and also as quite popular public space for people. So the people were really engaged in using the site more than just visiting it only on a particular date. And then we have the siege that happened 92 to 96. In this configuration, Vraca Memorial Site was beyond the siege, so it was actually, again, occupied by the perpetrators who used the site to shoot at the civilians, both launching their heavy artillery and also snipers. In this process, and as the Serbs were pulling out after the siege, there was quite a bit of a destruction that happened. And then in the years after that, in sort of the final stage, the post-Dayton era, the site was completely abandoned, vandalized, just not really forgotten enough that nobody did anything there, but remembered enough that people went and vandalized. They took a lot of like old brass covers from the domes of the fortress. The arm of this sculpture that you can see went missing. So just kind of random acts of vandalism. And so in the post-Dayton era, if we look at the site, you can see the line of division between the two entities. So most of the site, memorial site, actually is in the Federation, but there's the small section that belongs to Republika Srpska. And I guess needless to say that even though we know that the war erupted based on many of the nationalist ideas, but somewhere in 2014, there was a plaque that was installed celebrating Ratko Mladic, who we know was convicted war criminal and responsible for genocide in Srebrenica. So it was installed, and then overnight, obviously in kind of a not much actually publication about it or announcement, but then it was quickly discovered, and then it sort of went back and forth with vandalizing that plaque and then them renewing, and then somebody from the Federation removing it again. And so it keeps kind of going back and forth. Since then, there has been quite a bit of interest actually in using, in the last few years, in using the site more for the people again. So there was like a big activism for cleaning up the park. There was an installation by an artist to the sculpture, which was really dedicated to women warriors for Second War, with this wooden arm. Again, just trying to plug in the symbolism of this resistance and people trying to bring the memorial back. There's also a couple of 2 or 3 conceptual ideas that deal with the site, but more in a way of just kind of beautification and perhaps heritage of the fortress itself, but not really dealing again with the issues of what the site is, how it could be opened up as a platform for discussion to moving forward. And so on one hand, we have Vraca, which has a very long history. I'm showing the view here from the east side of Sarajevo. You can see the dense valley and kind of the settlement of the city. But if we go to the west end, we are faced with flatlands that are kind of carved with 3 rivers, railroad tracks. Here, there was in 1710, a first Catholic parish was established here. And so over the years, actually, this area in the western suburbs became quite a focused neighborhood for the Bosnian Croats to kind of settle. That also increased after the World War II when a couple of factories were built and more people came in. So during the siege, the fluctuation of the siege really changed radically in the early 1992 and first part of 93, and then it kind of became the stagnant line. But if we look at this little blue bubble on the left here, that is the site that we're focusing on. So originally it was part of Bosnian army, but then eventually in the early 93 was lost to the Serb Republic and remained that way until the end of the war. So this intersection, this very small neighborhood, essentially something like 6.5 square kilometers, was interesting because all 3 ethnic groups were fighting on this very small ground. So because of the already heavy presence of the Catholics, it was sort of a no-brainer and not a surprise that the Croatian military defense, HVO, formed on that site and kind of this area became their headquarters. And then, of course, joined on with the Bosnian army in collaboration, but surrounded by the Serb Republic army. And it became quite focused area, very strategic point in defense of the siege. So because of the flatness, right, of the area, the Serb, presumably, the Serb military could have just rolled in with tanks and kind of taken over this immediately at the beginning of the war. It didn't have to take months for many lives to be lost. Part of the reason it didn't, because the Croatian military group decided to play kind of a political game and collaborate with the Serbian forces, which of course was then interpreted by the Bosnian forces as kind of betrayal. But they established kind of this peaceful collaboration in the sense that they let the humanitarian aid corridor to go through in exchange for getting their people, the inhabitants of these areas, out, which was happening a lot during this era, but the price for it was sort of high and not approachable to many people. So you can kind of see these negotiations happening early on in the war. Here I have actually comparison of two satellite images from 2002 and 2022. And you can see radical changes in what used to really be very rural area is now heavily built up with retail, kind of mixed use buildings and housing. And what this really means is that there is almost complete erasure of any traces of the battlefield that was once here. So like the little green lines, which are hard to see, were actually trenches that you can still pick out on the earliest satellite images that essentially you can then look at 2022 and you can see the buildings on top of these trenches. And there's no signage, nothing whatsoever on the site. Using the ICTY archives was part of this investigated study to kind of first find out details about the fluctuation of the siege, but also during that process we discovered this very kind of diverging narratives between all these witnesses, and that raised many questions in terms of, was Sarajevo really a besieged city? Was it a defended city? And you begin to kind of trace that perhaps the ICTY was meant to be this platform for the transitional justice, but in some ways it's also questioning, manipulating the history. So our sort of focus on this site is to look at these kind of liminal spaces that exist between these political gymnastics that are happening, and trying to find a way to approach the sites of remembrance in a slightly different way. The main inspiration focus for this investigated study was to look at the ICTY archives and use those as kind of a starting point. But another one was a very personal motivation, in which that my father was actually part of the Bosnian army and fought on that battlefield and eventually was killed in that battlefield in November of '92. And so the study and the investigation eventually culminated into a public exhibition that consisted of 3 parts. It was the site visit, as you can see here, was quite it brought this other element of fragmented history, the kind of personal history that was becoming part of a collective narrative by bringing it into this public space and public exhibition. One of the things that I guess the idea behind setting it up as an exhibition was to create a dialogue and an open platform for exchange of information by providing concrete information from all sides, which is the ICTY archive, as much contested as people like to be, but to have it on display for general public and to kind of have their take on what has happened. One of the images here you can see is the creation of, or recreation, reinterpretation really, of the archives themselves. These are the folders from the drawers, like archival drawers. Some of them are empty for unsolved cases or not enough information. Some of them do have documents, and then there are others, the folders are actually transparent and you can get kind of a glimpse of what is what the facts are from the archive itself. So memory is embedded and embodied both on the actual sites of remembrance and in something that we create, and we see it as a malleable process. The vast number of memorials in Bosnia are sort of celebrating or glorifying military leaders, notable dates and battles, civil victims, but it's all within each of the ethnic groups. So there's very little of a crossover in between. So shifting this kind of agonistic pathways of remembrance, the collective memory entails to be realigned and yield to more dialogue-driven process in presenting information in such a way that we can allow for that discussion to happen. The platform of ICTY archives laid out the groundwork to provide reparation for victims, initiate cross-ethnic dialogues, and legitimize crimes committed against civilians in urban fabric. But it can also serve as a tool, as an integral part of transforming sites of memory into visible defragmentation. So we really using this kind of example and case study to bring the awareness of transitional justice accountability and having that be the beginning part of the dialogue and agonistic pathway in how we continue forward with the history and the memory transmission between different generations. In terms of design and art practices of these sites as a way to sort of sustain agonistic remembrance on different scales, continuous rather than absolute approach allows us to examine context as multidimensional space and compare context against one another. One part of the exhibit was this tactile memory. So rather than actually occupying that sort of forgotten battlefield site, the moss was harvested from the site, which was one of the symbols. Actually, when we did visit the site, everything was just gray, as you saw in the pictures, devastated. There were ruins, essentially, but this moss somehow really was like a symbol of resilience on that site, like it wanted the life or part of that memory to sort of continue and be present. So we took those fragments as tactile memory, re-implanted them in a way into the exhibit space to bring that memory closer to any of the visitors. Also, it's a bit hard to see in this photo, but there was 18 windows in the exhibit room that surrounded. And so the pictures that were on the transparency on the windows was actually the view from the site. So it would have been the same view that the soldiers had from the trenches looking towards the free zone. So you were really transported in time in history and brought back kind of to reflect on by yourself today. So some scholars claim that pliability of memory is actually its greatest asset. The narratives of these two case studies, Vratsa Memorial Site and Azi Chiota's Forgotten Battlefield, show that both sides are not just kind of cold and unseen and forgotten, but that they actually embody collective memories and directly feature in articulating personal and collective identities. In this, they're key mediums that can be employed in processes of construction of agonistic remembrance based on a multi-perspective dialogue. Thank you.
I would like to welcome participants of the conference and researchers, implementers of the District project. I see that a huge work was done, and I hope projects there will be elaborated other or projects. As we can see, the topic of memories wars is very pressing and relevant. Today's presentations originally supposed that Professor Rosertsky will present the paper as it is an integral part of his dissertation research, as well as scientific projects supported by Shotor Rustaveli National Science Foundation. but due to some health problems, he was not able to join, and he asked me to apologize for this. I do not have presentation, and I will not need 20 minutes, so it will be short, and we will have time for discussion. The memories of war, violence, and trauma persist even after the cessation of active military confrontation, continues to create the preconditions for aggressive behavior, violence, and revanchism. Military activities, many people were killed, many were injured. The military activities were followed by forced detentions and displacement, torture, separation of families, and so on. Some of these violations are even now. I'm talking about Georgia, and thousands of people are direct or indirect victims of the conflict. Each conflicting party endeavors to preserve the memory of the deceased by compiling lists that documents brutal killings, erecting monuments and memorials, commemorating mournful dates. Information about victims is a raw material that politicians use to achieve some strategic superiority over the enemy in conditions of information psychological warfare. Through of data on victims, which we regard as a type of informational psychological weapon. Such leads to a breakdown in peace processes, the emergence of phenomena of secondary victimization, and has a severe psychological impact not only on individuals but also on the broader public. In our research, we view the memory of victims as a strategic resource that can play a vital role in peace building by fostering a shared understanding of experienced by all conflicting. Becomes possible when the parties involved comprehend one another, considering the victims within the context of shared trauma, shared grief, shared losses that they have suffered. We describe a strategy that entails the construction of a shared database of war victims as an approach that can contribute to the mutual understanding of common threats by the conflicting parties and the nonviolent resolution of existing problems, thereby strengthening a peace-building process and fostering a security community strategic terms, ultimately leading to the state of global peace, meta-peace. Advancement of this approach depends primarily on the level of post-conflict societies to change towards data on victim. By term of post-conflict, we mean the state of society has experienced an armed conflict, but this doesn't mean that the conflict is completely resolved. The informational and psychological component of the conflict is the main problem. One of the parameters of the level of preparedness of radicalization of society, and radical groups with mindset have a negative psychological impact by classifying peace-oriented citizens as traitors, collaborators, and representatives of the fifth column. The radicalization factor is enhanced by polarization, which suggests actions in response. Quite recently, on September 27th, Georgia celebrates the dates of the fall of the capital of Abkhazia, Sukhumi, and the same day, Zionist this date as a holiday, the day of liberation of the city from the Georgians. Up to 300,000 people were forced from Abkhazia, mostly ethnic Georgians, as well as people of other ethnic origins who wanted to preserve the territorial integrity of Georgia, so-called unionists. On this day, it's the issue of today is 30 August, and it happened 6 days before. One of the scientific organizations decided to hold a conference on the day, which was dedicated to the memory of scientists who died during the armed conflict in Abkhazia. In our part, it was proposed to dedicate or to mention during this event those scientists who died from the other part of the conflict, However, the conference organizers refrained from these proposals. There was also representatives of the other side of the conflict with about scientists who were killed or died during the armed conflict. They agreed, however, but did not send any data. And this is an indicator that the parties are not ready to restore communication, despite the fact that about 30 years have passed since the end of this war. Particularly unpleasant is representatives of the academic community are not this. At the same time, during the research cases were recorded in Georgia when during the feast parties, especially in small groups, there were mentioned people who died from all sides of the conflict. There was an important initiative proposed by the Catholic Patriarch of Old Georgia, Elias II, regarding the construction of a common monument to the victims of the war, similar to the famous monument to the victims of the civil war in Spain. However, this initiative was not neither by politicians or by society. During the years of conflict, there was no attempt to create a systematic of victims, considering international experience. Consequently, there is no data of victims. And the victims of military conflicts and categories coming from our experience in these conflicts, in the field, in the conflicts directly, that families of the victims, internally displaced persons, injured people, victims of enforced disappearance, including also for missing persons, their families, people currently living along the line of separation. Additionally, it is necessary to take into account specific imposed by age, gender, and other social factors. The list is not complete, and there is no systematic categorization of victims. Accordingly, there is no overall picture of the representation, the rights, and interests of victims in various social programs, including humanitarian, psychological, medical, and other type of assistance. Specific problem is the issue of using data of victims as a propaganda tool when each side is appealing to its own data, and that aggravates the division and level of distrust of divided communities. That's why it's important to create common picture of victims, present the problems of victims as a common strategy. Especially important is that such a picture should be created by joint efforts of experts representing of all sides of the conflicts. But here the problem of communication comes as despite the fact that there are some exchange of opinions of the individual level in the internet, especially in social networks, there are practically no formats for communication for the work of thematic groups of experts directed on elaboration of a common intellectual product. So to change this situation in this area and creation of a new type of international organizations are necessary, including organizations that would unite victims. So to promote these initiatives, we invite participants of this conference to support the idea of victims of foreign violence in Tbilisi, with participation of major international organizations such
Yes.
10 minutes, but
Oh, you're going in 10 minutes? Okay. I haven't got 10 minutes of words. I've got a question for both of you in the room. So I really enjoyed your papers very much, really interesting, and I learned a lot from both of them. Alana, I wanted to ask you about participatory budgeting and that initial voting, because it struck me before you even started talking about the artworks that that initial figure of 1,100 whatever was low as well, and I made a note of it straight away to ask you about that before you started talking about the even lower numbers involved in the rest of the decision making. So yeah, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that if you could. And yeah, I just wanted to ask more about the exhibition, where it took place, who came to see it, the reactions that you got, all sorts of, yeah, anything that you can provide on that. Should I pass on to you, David?
Thanks. Yeah. Oh, it's very loud. That was all really fascinating papers. The relationship between agonism and memorials is something I've thought about. I've published a little bit about it and thought about it a lot. And I was thinking about Selma's paper and also thinking about Alana's paper. It just strikes me, Alana, that there's something about the unquestioned nature of the value of the memorial that is behind the process that you're talking about. I mean, the memorial as form. Yeah, so the memorials we know, at least in kind of Western Europe, in other parts of the world as well, that dominate our public spaces, that really come out of the 19th century and the mid to late 19th century, when democratization was sort of beginning to trouble the power of the bourgeoisie, and they were wanting to kind of like stamp their authority on urban spaces. So a lot of the memorials related to people who were slave owners in the UK come from that time. The Colston Memorial in Bristol, which was recently kind of toppled. And the very idea of the kind of memorial is that you fix something. You're trying to impose a particular ideology on the space. It's not supposed to be a movable feast. It's not supposed to be in dialogue with anything. It's not. It's a monologue. And then you've got like people wanting to put in memorials for progressive kind of causes, which we all support. Yeah, the idea of that slavery being commemorated in the urban spaces of Western Europe, we all think that's a good thing, but we're still going back to this idea of a fixed architectural kind of ensemble, but that in itself is not a dialogue. It can never be a dialogue, it seems to me. Whereas, the processes that Selma is talking about, that's, agonistic practice kind of have to be practices. They have to be renewed. They have to be ongoing. Part of agonism is about being open-ended. I'm not sure that a physical memorial of any kind can be open-ended. But then you get caught in this dilemma, I think, that if, the kind of exhibition that Selma and her partner were doing there obviously has that kind of dialogistic, open-ended, ongoing, processual nature to it. But then how do you maintain that? Can you keep going forever? Always creating new interventions, new kind of practices to keep that dialogue open. So I'm just kind of throwing that in there and maybe Harachan, who's talked a lot about the kind of process around the Stepanaka. It's not sorry. Thank you. The memorial for the Armenian genocide is very open-ended as well. So maybe he's got something to say about that as well. But I sort of throw that in as an observation about the relationship between agonism and the memorial form per se.
Well, from a practitioner's point of view and coming from South Asia, where also we had partition memories, which are still, evoke a lot of emotional response and political as well as at a personal level. I agree with David that structured memorials they are obviously rigid, they are physical, and they sometimes are imposed on you by the oppressive forces. But in my view, the memories, especially the memories of suffering and pain, I mean, they can't be forgotten or glossed over, but they also, one should not wallow, or one should not just leave them open-ended. I can refer to an example which you might be, at least might have heard of, is the mourning month of Muharram in Shiite Islam, but in Islam in general, where every year the tragedy of Karbala, where Prophet's family was brutalized and massacred, it is remembered and relived. And although it's very painful through that week, but also has a therapeutic or cathartic value as well. But generally, from my own experience of having worked with on oral history projects, or interviewed or written about stories of partition survivors of 1947, I have found that if you, like a surgeon, you open the wound, but then you don't leave it open or leave it bleeding or even worsened, but you then very delicately close it also. And what we do is that when we are, sometimes stories are very grim, insufferable, but we open them, and open them with the surgeon's art, very skillfully, with a little bit of music, a little bit of Sufi healing process. And then at the end, we find some ray of hope, so that people are not even worse off than having just forgotten and not revisited or relived that process. So I was just wondering if, Selma, from your experience, or Anna as well, if this going into some very painful memories, is it possible to then close it cleanly? You are wiser, you are reminded of your experiences of your community, but at the same time, you are not really, you don't want to go and kill yourself or kill someone else.
So I think that we have a few questions now to choose from or to respond to. I would like to add one more, which is communicating with what David said, that memorials by nature are not very democratic, but I think that there is something stable about memorials, but something changing as well. So there are some moments when national monuments are often erected at national level, or at least at municipality level. There's something official about them, but the ceremonies or the commemorative processes around them are more moving and interactive, like all the things that happened around Colston, for example, in Bristol, were assigned. Yes. Yeah. And I think that it would be also interesting. So what was really interesting in these two presentations and very coherent is that you somehow showed the changes around the memorials and the kind of process of making them, and there is some negotiation now with broader society in this, how the official commemoration should shift. And I think that I was missing this a bit in the first presentation. Like, I would like maybe to ask Harutian to comment a bit on how the agonistic negotiation around this memorial is present, if it's present at all in this process. And I think I would also like to have a bit more from Alana about the sacred nature of some memory, which you develop in the paper that is submitted, which I thought was a really good point. So yes, I think then you have 4 questions, and I don't know in which order, so who would like to respond first? Yeah, go. Yeah, maybe order. Yes, we can keep the order in which we presented. So Harutian, would you like to respond to any? We don't hear you. Are you muted, maybe?
Yes. So there, I received two questions, one from David and one from Christina. I can say that in the memorial we can see the memory of the past, how it is becoming part of the memory of the present. Events which took place 100 years ago, suddenly we see that they are very very usual for today's situation, and they are part of the living memory. And I can't say that if they are becoming antagonistic or agonistic. I don't know the answer to this question, but people who are visiting every year the memorial, and as I already told, that visiting the first cross stones, which are at the beginning of the memorial, they saw that the memory of the events which took place some 100 years ago are very common for today's situation. And I'm not sure that I do not want Armenians to add one more Khachkar devoted to the 2023 Armenian genocide or Armenian um, how to say the events which we have now, ethnic cleansing. Yes, but you know, in this case we have a denial. If there will be no denial, I think we will have more possibility to apply to the past as an agonistic memory. But the denial isn't helpful in this case. And I can say that the ceremonies which are taking place during April 2024 commemoration marches are very democratic, really very democratic, and nobody's asking people to go to the memorial, and they do it themselves on their own decision. And it means that, in my opinion, it means that they are very democratic. Is agonistic memory present or not during April 24 marches? It is hard to say, because several 100,000 people, each of them is visiting with his own memory related to his or her ancestors. And I can say, because still the denial exists, and still the perpetrator state haven't asked for excuse, I am not sure for the agonistic part of the memory which is prevailing, which can be prevailed. So there are still questions for me from that point of view.
Okay, thank you, Harution. Alana?
So I will try to remember the questions I received. Should I address in order? Yeah. Okay, so the first question was about the low numbers of the difference in numbers during the participatory budgeting and the consultation. So I don't know if I mentioned, but the process of voting in the participatory budgeting can be made by SMS and online. So usually what the members of the association told me is that they would go to the streets, present the memorial project to people, and ask them to vote immediately. So this is how they probably got a larger number of votes. And relating to the consultation, we will find classical problems that we have with in-person participatory processes. not everyone is allowed, it's available to participate the day and the hour where these public sessions were happening. The municipality did not, there was this idea that the association was empowered in this process, that they had the power to conduct the project as they wanted. But actually, we can also say that the municipality said, you won this project, so now do whatever you want. So the municipality also did not help to advertise the consultation process. So we can say that it was not very well advertised, the time was not convenient, but then the opponents will also bring a new element, that perhaps there was also people that did not identify with the proposals that were being brought forward.
And I'm going to stop you because this is, it all makes sense. But I'm struck by that initial number. The one, I think that's a low number in a big city.
Yes. This is a, I'm sorry, this is a low number, but also the project that received the biggest number of votes that year had 2,000. Okay. So actually, we could say that people are not very interested about the participatory budgeting. Should I keep? Okay. There was also a question about if we should keep having a dialogue forever to finally have agonism. I think everyone is very much familiar with this phrase of James Young, where he says that the best memorial was the debate that was that took place to discuss this memorial. This could be an idea. I don't know. At the end of the day, we need to make decisions. But at least, perhaps in the case of Lisbon, perhaps we should be more open to be challenged. If people are not very happy with the proposals that were brought forward, why not to restart this process? Because the thing is that now is the municipality that is not willing to build the memorial for other reasons that I'm still also trying to understand. But perhaps what I would say that is the agonism is to have this capacity of rethink a decision and being willing to remake the process if we have the opportunity. And there was also this point about how the design of these memorials, they changed. We can say that nowadays, with this idea of democratization of heritage, there are many different groups that also want to have their histories recognized in the landscape. But now there's also very much a big discourse about the participation of people in this decision. So in London, for example, where I study a state-sponsored memorial, people are also complaining that they did not participate enough. So I think that this call for more participation will also appear more and more. But we also need to think that since the 80s, 70s, there's also this shift towards abstract, minimalist memorials, and also this idea that a memorial itself cannot do all the memory work. So people also want to have interpretive centers with these memorials. And in very dense urban centers, all these structures, they have impacts, environmental and social impact. So there's also citizen participation that it's imposed by law, because if you are building anything in the public space, you need to follow regulations to be able to have a planning permit. So yeah, in London and Amsterdam, for example, the opposition to the memorials that I studied, they are very much driven by environmental concerns, which is very hard to negotiate. You have this moral imperative to commemorate an atrocity, but people that are saying that we should keep the trees for the future generations. And this in a process where you need to take a final decision, because this is urban planning. It's very, very hard and emotional and difficult to deal. And this is also one of the focus of my research. And you also raised the question about the sacred value that as part of my research is to try to understand which are the values that actually we talk about plural values, non-negotiable values, but it's sort of grazed on no one. I never knew actually which were these values. So I trying to take some time to identify these values. And I discovered that some of these values at some point, they become non-negotiable. And these I'm calling sacred values, and this is not related to sacrality in a religious way. It's a concept that I took from psychology, and I think that it's used in conflict studies. And I use this to say that there are some kind of values that people don't want to trade off. They don't want to negotiate. And probably I'm arguing now in my thesis is that when a value is invested with this non-negotiable character, then you cannot you cannot escape the antagonism. You cannot get rid of this. But yeah, I think that's...
Okay, so the first question was about a bit more details about the exhibition. The research grant was actually provided by Balkan Investigated Network, reporting network, BERN, and in collaboration with the Netherlands government. So they were sort of funding this to open the access to the ICTY archives and kind of dig in and find different information. And then because I guess my interpretation is because of my background becomes always visual, it doesn't stop at sort of written work. It was clear that this should not just stay as like a report, that it should become elaborated and reinterpreted in visual terms. And so that's how the exhibition sort of was born. It was in Sarajevo in March of this year. It kind of worked out nice actually, because originally I was thinking to do it at that abandoned building on the site. It would have been a little bit maybe logistically tricky, but anything is possible in Sarajevo. But we decided to go for actually the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network house. They have a space, they're renovating it to turn it into a museum, but it's unfinished. So it was kind of really nice. Actually, the space was not like this nice finished gallery space. It was raw concrete, unfinished with exposed beams. So it really kind of fit in, because all of this is unfinished story, right? We keep finding evidence and telling stories and collecting oral narratives and rebuilding and building our history and memory. A lot of people came. Some of them I knew personally, and they were invited from sort of childhood friends to like my high school teacher who showed up. So it was sort of like I left Sarajevo in '95, almost towards the end of the war. And of course, I go back and I keep in touch with some of them, but some of them I don't see on a regular basis. So like seeing your high school chemistry teacher it floored me, I have to say. It was very cool. But then a lot of people that I didn't know. What really made me very happy is that there was a lot of young people that came, because that is the biggest problem in Bosnia, because this history, most recent war, is just starting to be taught in books, not unified, obviously, through both entities. So Republika Srpska has their own textbooks and their version, and Federation has. But even the Federation, from that standpoint, is introduced briefly, honestly, and not in depth, not really in discussion. So a lot of young people, they sort of maybe know through relatives these stories that, yeah, there was a war relatively recently, that somebody fought, somebody was maybe killed. Obviously, if you've lost somebody, it becomes a bit more closer. But if you haven't, it's just this kind of story. They see it on TV, commemorations, but they don't know. They really don't know the story. And so part of this case study and the importance of it is that the autobiographical account, that one story can actually begin to influence the collective memory. It draws people in. So rather than hearing about the military heroes, the commanders, which would all obviously deserved the story time in terms of what they achieved and defended the country, a lot of them lost their lives, but it feels a bit distant. So it's kind of this like hero, and these generations especially have not been brought up like when I was growing up. Tito was the hero, one, not multiple. There was one, and we all knew inside out why and how and all that. These generations, they're not brought in. There was nothing really to there was not a single person. And so I think they connect a bit more through personal experiences and anecdotes, where they can really it's that almost the physical, tactile connection. I'm in the room and I'm telling the story, whether like this, talking about it, or with something that they can read through and see, and they can begin to like make that connection of the past. So this like translation of memory between generation is much more effective in that sense. The kind of comment about the memorials, absolutely, any memorial, any architectural built form is, once it's done, it's stamped, and it has its sort of message and point, which might be relevant at the time and for maybe even decades to come, even sometimes centuries. And then there comes times where it needs to be taken down, put in a storage, or removed or readjusted in some ways. So I don't personally, I think memorials, and this is in Bosnia what's been happening, people wanted something. They wanted some kind of a mark that this happened. So this is why we have the image that I showed, so many different memorial types. Most of them are essentially name plaques in some shape or form, right? Sometimes just a plaque on the wall, sometimes it's sort of three-dimensional with maybe some kind of a sculptural element, but it's about the names. People want to go, they want to take their kids or grandkids and point to the name and say, this is your cousin, uncle, grandfather, father, right? There's that, again, trying to make that individual connection rather than taking them in front of the one particular monument that absolves all of our memories. In this war, I think it's almost impossible to have that kind of memorial. So I think the way towards some kind of agnostic practice is not really building memorials, it's building educational centers that have history traces evident, but that there's this constant malleable progress and process in between the generations, between information found. A lot of times we find new information that we didn't know existed that impacts it one way or the other. So I think that is the way forward. There's a couple of things that are happening in Bosnia, like the War Childhood Museum. I mean, they're the actual museum that have collected artifacts from the people who were kids during the siege and testimonials and all of this. So in some way, I guess it's very traditional museum, right? You have exhibits and you can read little bits of pieces of the stories, but they also are very active with schools, a lot more than the actual like national curriculum that provides. And they do so many workshops with the young people that really, that are very well organized and not traumatic in terms of if they know a bit more to kind of bring, you know, these like flashbacks or whatever, but they really open dialogue and they bring different groups of people. Because again of the division of two entities, they are not able to bring in the schools from the Serb Republic. Every time they try, and they tried and tried many times, they get refusal from their Ministry of Education for obvious reasons. They don't want their kids, even if the children or the parents even, or who knows, the school might be interested in collaboration. They just simply will not allow that. So, but there's a lot of spots in Bosnia, you know, we have Bosnian Croats. There's also questionable history there in terms of the ethnic division, but they cooperate a bit more. So there's kind of bridges being built with the young generations, at least on a level of understanding really what happened. How they, when they leave the room and go back, how much influence they, you know, among their own family, of course, that's a different story, but at least it's a start in terms of building some kind of, I guess, remembrance, collective remembrance that it's not in a singular form of a monument, essentially. And then I think the last question was the surgeon and cutting up the wounds and all of that. Obviously, they're very sort of spot on. I guess I would say that the difficult memory and reconstructing memories and fragments, individual fragments, it's a very long process, and it's not the same for each of us, right? For reconciliation, for remembers, for forgiveness, we all kind of take different paths. For me personally, the first project that I did was in 2005. It was like a 10-year anniversary when I left the city under the tunnel because the city was still under the siege. So I thought, oh, this is a great idea. I'll do the project and I'll tell my story. This was when I was finishing my master's in the US. And so I collected all this research, but I went back into my diaries because I kept a diary during the war and sort of constructed this timeline to show again the parallel between individual and collective. On one hand, I was a teenager. My stories were just like any other teenager in the world, not in a war. But then there were threads. Every once in a while, I'll say, we haven't had water for 40 days and electricity, and finally we got it. And, I was up all night watching movies, like catching up on life, that wasn't under the candle. But it exhausted me 100%. And then I made the biggest mistake. The exhibit that I had for that, I wanted to make it personal. So I did the opening on the anniversary of my dad's when he was killed. It just worked out sort of with the dates. It was going to be in November. And I'm like, hey, November is special for me. I'll do it on that date. And that was not, not the best decision because you don't, in advance, it thinks like a great idea, but when you're there, when you begin to kind of relate to these stories, it was too much. So literally boxed it up, put it in a closet, like no more memories, I'm good. And it really took 10 years after that, when I started my own family, when my kids were starting to go to Bosnia, and just, kids they're without filters and they see the world as it is. And so they would begin to ask these questions about like what they saw in the city in terms of the damage, what's this red thing on the floor, the Sarajevo roses that are filled, the marks of the grenades. And I realized that this is a new conversation. So I have to restart this internally with the family, but then as that started, it sort of leaked out into the public, and I became more engaged with these. So it is painful as a starting point, I guess, but I see the bigger use of it, that it becomes not just this individual story, that it actually has impact on others, both from Bosnia and outside. So hopefully that answers the questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for these responses, and thanks also for sharing all these stories that are really very touching. And so we are reaching the moment when we have to close. So we have to close this debate after this panel, but we also have to close the conference. So I had some requests from Joanna to make an announcement, from Veronica also to, yes. Okay, Joanna, can you please come forward? Okay, you can type here into my, it is in this, so everybody can see. You can take my computer and, where are you? No, you were in the chat.
All right.
And you just,
Okay.
I don't know
But
what
then
you did with, you
they
just,
won't see it, right?
they would see it, but I
Yeah.
think that here it is actually.
sorry.
Wait, here. So if you type it
Okay.
in here, you can take this away
Oh, right.
and just sit down comfortably.
Okay, so I do that. Okay, so I do that in a moment. Then I just maybe they just send it to everyone because what I wanted. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I have to say this one. No, just because what I wanted to do, just very briefly, to invite all of you who are not yet members of the Memory Studies Association to join the association. And I wanted to show the website so then you can see where is it and what is it for. So especially for the younger researchers who do memory studies, I think it might be useful because it gives you networks, right? And then you can network with others who are doing that what you do. If you are not that much in memory studies, but you are a kind of the older researchers, and sometimes you do something which is on the edge of memory studies, it can be also useful. We are also very happy to collaborate with practitioners. So of course, just a few words what Memory Study Association is for those who don't know it. It's a quite large and enlarging international association trying to connect people doing memory studies, both from Europe and outside of Europe. And now we are more and more eager to collaborate with people from bringing insight to that what has been kind of the European core of memory studies and bringing in from other places of the world. That's why I'm just looking into the eyes of my Pakistani colleagues. Please join us because we do need your expertise. We also have look at the working groups. So if you are doing like memory and art, you can go to the memory and art group. If you are interested in the post-socialist memory studies, there is a really vivid group on the post-socialist memory studies. And we also have kind of the special programs. And one of the program is the one which we call Memory Scholars at Risk. And this is where, if you know people who are doing either memory studies scholar or are heritage practitioners who might need help, you might consider applying to that. And there are more opportunities, and I would just type in the website and just send it to everyone. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I just ask Tomek to circulate it to everyone who's at the conference, and that would be the best way. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for this. So maybe we should formally close this panel by putting our hands together one more time for all the speakers. And so we have like 25 minutes on our program before we have dinner, right? And then we then attend the concert that is planned for tonight. So we have like 25 minutes to make sense and share reflections and any last comments about this conference, like what ideas did it trigger, and finally maybe draw some conclusions, even temporary ones, about agonism as a potential, as a possible model that we can maybe use to some extent in some situations under some conditions. So I would not want to prescribe what these conclusions should be about, but maybe we have a microphone in the room, and maybe I could then take some comments in the first round, and then maybe some contributions reflecting on the comments, so that we kind of collectively gather some final concluding thoughts, if you agree with this. So, usual thing, raise your hands if you think you have any final concluding comments. Rosanna.
So still, there is a little hope for national states to reflect on this. And that's mean that, like, understanding that point and accepting it, it means that we took our self-responsibility, like to create that smaller groups, smaller hubs, to like pass that ideas through our papers, to our peers, some other networks, seeing other small scale possibilities. Otherwise, following all the presentations, as I saw a very little space for bigger systems to reflect on agonism, is rather for my understanding, for more smaller scale dimensions, and maybe grassroots or real one situational reflections on the events.
Thanks.
In theater or drama, drama would not exist without diverging or different points of view and some conflict and resulting into some resolution. So I have been practicing that, but when I got this invitation about pathways to agonism, I had to look up in the dictionary. And I realized that I am already traveling on that path, or at least now I know this is a pathway in the right direction. So I would stop agonizing and embrace agonism.
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for your papers, because I'm just trying to think when we started writing this bit. I think it was in like about 2017, possibly. So it feels like it was long before we actually got the money. So it feels like it's been a long road, and it is quite amazing to see all the different flowers that have kind of bloomed in this garden, where we all came together from not really knowing each other. I think some of us knew each other in passing, but not really. And it's amazing that this community has been built and has kind of continued to grow, also with our Lithuanian colleagues coming to us a little bit later in the project. And also, I think people who are not sort of part of the consortium, but we've decided they're part of the project now. Where's Luzina? She's still here. I think she's decided she's officially part of the project, and there are many. Oh, you're there! Hiding in plain sight. Hiding in plain sight there. Yes, blended in beautifully. But there are many others who feel like they're now just part of what we're doing, and that's great. I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things. I think we started off with this kind of idea of agonism as just a kind of an impulse to thinking. I think in the contributions I've heard today, where it's working best is as a kind of an impulse to thinking about things differently. I think if we get caught up in sort of saying that somehow agonism is like the gold standard of memory, and then we just look at various case studies and decide whether they have succeeded in achieving agonism or not, that's kind of not very helpful. But I think we can find moments where that idea can be productive in certain situations to make something new happen. And I think this project is about making new things happen, even if, as you say, Rosanna, on a very small scale. Sometimes that can be hopeful. And the only other thing I would say is I have one regret, and that is that I didn't encourage colleagues to include a creative element to the project, because I've been listening to all of your stories about sort of getting chased down by the Polish police with driving Pakistani colleagues around the borderlands, or getting stranded in certain places, or deciding to go to Kabul when people told you you shouldn't. Yeah. I know we had the blog, but I wish I had from the beginning instituted some kind of creative writing project where you all had to write something autobiographical about this project, because I can imagine we could have done another book which would have been the creative reflection on the experience of doing the project, or a performance, or the images that we saw from Kabul today. I'm sure there were lots of other kind of mini photographic projects that happened just as people were moving around. So that's my regret. So if next time I'm foolish enough to try and do a big project like this, as the next one, I shall be getting everybody to become creative as well. So that's all I had to say.
Thanks, David. Who is next?
I can live with it, I think.
Yes. So I wonder if there is anyone in the room who felt very skeptical, or to some extent skeptical initially about the agonistic framework proposed by the project, and who turned around and who is more convinced now. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Because for a while, well, even before, I didn't know that the project was focused on this particular theory. I just learned it when the conference was announced. But even before that, from all the theories about peace, not about memory, especially from postmodern theories, I would say, agonistic one was the most difficult for me to kind of really believe and understand that it works, even though I have been practicing some parts of it for a while. So I think theoretically it's, it seems possible. To me, it seems possible for smaller groups of people. But the world we have now in terms of nation states, I don't believe practically it's possible to make work given the world order in the bigger sense. So that's it's an interesting lens also to look at how different initiatives are happening, what is working, what is not working. So in terms of lens and theoretical framework, it's quite interesting and you can apply it, but I am not convinced that it works in bigger, like in nation state world, which still is. I don't know how it would change, but given the developments, I am very skeptical.
Tomek.
So I'm not very sure if we are ready now to judge who is convinced or who is not convinced, like in a final way, because I think this concept of pathway, which we coined with regard to the book, is important to me also because pathways are about making steps, right? I mean, you're making steps while going on a pathway, and the big result of this project of ours, which I don't hesitate to say, it faced hardships at the beginning, the big result of it is that regardless of how optimistic or pessimistic we were towards agonism and agonistic perspective, we all, or almost all of us, decided to try taking some steps towards this direction. And this is what brings us all here, and this is where we all meet in this attempt to make steps on the pathway to agonism, whatever it is for everyone. Like it's a little bit different pathway, but still what unites us is that we're making these steps and on this pathway. And maybe, you know, the timeline of the project, as we spoke today with David in the bus, the timeline of the project and the timeline of our intellectual reflections and conclusions, like about the project, are not very much don't go hand in hand always. So the project will end, but most probably the final conclusions for us as intellectuals about these steps will come later. So I share the hope which David articulated, that the community will grow and that the pathways will continue. Thank you so much.
I do not agree that agonism does not work on national, international level, and state level. Actually, it was Poland that did a very big agonistic project, the ULB, Ukraine, Litva, Belarus, Giedroyc, and Miloš. So, but especially Giedroyc. I don't know why we did not talk about this, but this is really very important. And this is one of the main reasons why we did not have wars here after the collapse of the Soviet Union in this part of Europe, like in Yugoslavia, for example, happened. So this ULB, Giedroyc, and all this foreign policy of Poland that happened after the collapse of Soviet Union, it was really something incredible. And this is one of the reasons why we got project of Czyżewski, of Borderland Foundation here, is somehow almost directly connected to this. And this project is really fantastic, and it makes impact on other states, on neighboring states of Belarus, or Ukraine, and Lithuania. So this is really so. What we should do is only to learn from Poles, from Czyżewski, from this project, and to continue on different levels. Actually, this is what I'm doing in Lithuania. I'm trying to do. Okay, so I think it's.
Arsen?
Yeah, but just a very small comment. Maybe my comment was based on a very particular recent experience. Maybe that's why I kind of was very, I don't know, skeptical. I think humanly, I wish agonism would work, because that is the way I kind of see the world, and I wish the world would be like that. But I mean, maybe I should learn more from Polish experience, because this is my first time that I'm in such a context in Poland. But just to tell that it's like very interesting to explore more, probably.
Okay, just would like to say that my work till now has been inspired by the theory of deliberation, and agonism and deliberation are put in contrast, maybe unnecessarily, because there's a certain overlaps, and maybe one theory applies to certain situations while another one to other situations, and that's up to us to decide which in what will be useful to get us out of the conflict situation, for example. I don't know. Till now, I've seen more applicability of deliberation, but maybe it's at the local level. I have to learn myself still how use the values of agonism and apply it practically.
About your comment, I would like to answer also. In my opinion, in international level, it must be work if state didn't have any problems. any political war, etc., etc. And you mentioned the Poland-Lithuanian case, but Poland and Lithuania now it's not in the situation of war. They don't have political problems. It's just a like cultural memory, politics, etc., etc. But we coming from the region under the war and the other state totalitarian policy of memory. That word is different. That's why if you international level, it's very complicated issue about antagonism and memory policy. If you don't have influence on the other state to change their memory of policy. That's why. Yes, it's politics. Memory is politics. In international part of international politics also. But every you need to influence the other state. It's not on your internal policy. Yeah.
What Poles did, for example, with our region, with Lithuanians, Belarusians, Ukrainians, and towards Germany, they told that they love their neighbors at the beginning. So they got this concept of Kresy. Yeah, Vilnius is Polish and Grodno Polish and so on. And we were in conflict. Lithuanians also were they do not like Poles. But Poles are coming to us, to Lithuanians, saying that we love you and we do not want your Vilnius. We want to help you. We want to give you money to come here to Pogranice and to drink wine here with other people. And so there is no conflict. It's very, very such, so very prudent what Poles did. And really, I don't know other cases on such an extent.
If not the greater antagonism with Russia, would agonism work in this region?
No, you always can find as many as you want enemies. We Lithuanians, we are enemies with everyone around. We do not like anybody. And it's a normal situation. Nobody likes anybody. Nobody. But these guys from Poland, they somehow they declare that they love their neighbors. And they do not want to take Vilnius from us. We are 2 millions, they are 40 millions. And and so it's maybe it sounds comic, but really this what they did to Poles for the last 30 years. It's really something extraordinary.
Okay, we have 6 more minutes in this plenary discussion before we go for dinner,
No, I
where we can still continue to talk about these things.
Yeah, I just have
Some short comments, maybe.
Yeah, very short comment that it perhaps could be a little bit helpful for such a discussion actually to define what we understand by agonism, because like listening to the papers throughout these 3 days, we did have a different ideas what we put behind that. So I mean, so it's just different understandings, and even if we come from Chantal Mouffe, so the way, I mean, so how she was used in memory studies, but also like in different projects, it just there's a different, there's broad area of ways of thinking about that. And the second, I think what is also might be useful for the project is that it started with the idea about the space, right? So kind of bringing agonism in relation to space and and people relation to space, that also, I think would also be perhaps analytically useful to think forward.
Yeah, I would like to add in terms of, I think it's a theater of oppressor and oppressed in the world, and it's a very sensitive topic. But being a researcher, like as a community of researcher and artists, is also like for us, it's a time to think how we contribute to a community that they are suffered with those kind of memories, because these sufferings are like it travel in the generations. It has more impact. And it's in it also like we have to think about like our researches, our artworks, how can also be contributed and push this governance system to apply, to sensitize towards community, because it's ultimately like it's travel like from individual to community. So like I think it's a like wonderful initiative, but like we have to think collectively how we can help community very practically, because I also saw that working with biennial, like even whenever these conferences happen, the community belongs to art or researchers. We are here, so where is the community? Where are the people that we are representing? Are they should have also part of such kind of initiatives, what is happening and what they are suffering. That I think that is it's a kind of exclusion, like we always work, but this exclusion can never be happen because they are part of this journey. Thank you.
Yes, maybe back to David. David, the beginning and the end.
I don't have a question. I don't have a question, but I'm sure you were going to make some thanks, Christina. I'm sure you're going to thank the people who put together the conference. But just before we closed, somebody said at the beginning, "Oh, you're the godfather of the project." If I am in a paternal role, I was a very bad father, because I immediately abandoned the project and went off elsewhere. A lot of fathers like that, I think. And then handed it over to, I'm going to call them three amazing mothers. First to Nina, then to Sophie, then to Christina. And it's a big weight carrying a project like this. So can I ask for a round of applause to them?
Thanks. And so maybe we can finish with a round of thanks. So thanks for David for obtaining the funding. Thanks for everybody who carried it. Thanks for the amazing project coordinators of each teams who brought together teams and coordinated actions and managed money and many other things. Thanks very much for the organizers of these amazing 3 days, 3.5 days action. Thanks for all the artists who contributed with artworks. Thank you for everybody at Pogranice Foundation for receiving us and hosting us so generously and beautifully and creating this space, because we said at some point also that without a space where agonistic debate can take place, there is no agonism. So this was actually, I think, also a beautiful journey. Yes, there should be. Yes, yes. Yes, so I think that this is, I think that this all requires now a glass of wine really urgently. So many thanks for everybody, and maybe let's move to the next point. Yes, and thanks for so we have some final messages. Arpina says, thank you, amazing team. Katarina says, huge congrats, and thank you to all for the amazing presenters, questioners, responders. Yeah, so thanks. Thanks for listening remotely as well.